As Washington prepares for the transfer of power, Canadians are worried that incoming President Donald Trump's threat to slap tariffs on all Canadian exports coming into the U.S. will soon become a reality. Canadian leaders are hopeful tariffs can be avoided. Canada's U.S. Ambassador Kirsten Hillman talked about that and what's at stake when she joined the PBS NewsHour this week.
We are, a very important source of sales and exports for American people. And likewise, obviously, the United States is a very important customer for our products. So it would be mutually very difficult. It would immediately raise prices. There's no question about that. Prices at the pump would go up. Prices across consumer goods would go up. Prices for businesses would go up, and it would be very, very difficult for us. It would be very difficult for Americans as well.
The concern over U.S.-Canada trade and relations intensified last week, the same week that Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announced his intention to resign. And we're joined this week by Chris Kirkey, who is the director of the Center for the Study of Canada at SUNY Plattsburgh. Welcome. It's nice to have you back.
Thanks, Tom. It's so great to be here.
After weeks of speculation, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announced this past week he will resign, bringing to an end a decade of power for Trudeau, a progressive who at one point was the darling of the Liberal left. So why is he resigning and why now?
I think, he's been Prime Minister, be it over a majority government and a couple of minority governments for 9 years. And he's sort of looking at the tea leaves. I think there are an increasing number of members of the Liberal Party in the House of Commons that have suggested to him, look, we've been looking at polling now for about 18 months. And, the direction isn't good for the Liberal Party of Canada as far as a potential outcome in the next federal election. We've had ministers, most recently Chrystia Freeland, the Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister, step aside. We've had ministers before that. And we've had caucus members in various parts of Canada who step up and say to him, look, have you not been reading the tea leaves? There's no chance that we can win with your leadership.
He says he intends to resign after the Liberal Party chooses a new leader, which a date has now been set for March 9th for that. The new Liberal leader will become the Prime Minister, and then are you expecting that shortly after that, Parliament will come back and there will be a vote to move ahead with a federal election, a no confidence vote, and a move ahead to call a federal election?
Yeah, I think most observers are suggesting there'll be one of two pathways. The first pathway is the one that you suggest. On the other hand, some observers are also suggesting that what the new leader might do is not reconvene Parliament. As you suggest correctly, March the 9th will be the day that we'll know who the new Liberal leader is. And he or she may simply go then directly to the Governor General and say, let's dissolve things without reconvening Parliament. And honestly, if I'm the new leader of the Liberal Party of Canada, it's not a bad idea.
The problem for the Liberals would be, though, the polling just shows how unpopular they are now. The Conservative Party, the Tories, with a 20, 25, even pushing 30% lead in the polls. That will be hard for the Liberals to overcome.
Absolutely. I mean, a lot of people in polling that have been done in Canada in the past year are saying, what if Justin Trudeau was not the leader of the Liberal Party of Canada? It was, say, Chrystia Freeland or Mark Carney, the former Bank of Canada governor. How would that impact the Liberal Party's prospects in a federal election? And most of those polls, I think all of them, show that it might help a little, but it wouldn't have a significant impact on the overall outcome. Even in urban areas, which has been the strength of the Liberal Party of Canada, that they're in a position to really, really be hammered, one might say, to be blunt, in this next election.
Chrystia Freeland, who you mentioned, also Mark Carney, do they appear to be the front runners?
They do at this time. I mean, a number of folks have already come out, Dominic LeBlanc, Mélanie Joly, saying that they're not going to run. There are other folks who undoubtedly will put their name in the hat, but Chrystia Freeland, given her positions that she's held in a high profile, one of the principal negotiators for Canada in revising the NAFTA agreement, and Mark Carney, who in addition to his time as the governor of the Bank of Canada was also the governor of the Bank of England. He's got a high national and international profile. And what's interesting about Mark Carney is he's less viewed by Canadians as being attached to this Liberal government and the Liberal period of progressivism. However, if he were to win the Liberal leadership contest, presuming he puts his name in the hat, what's going to be fascinating is how does he define what, in the course of the next election, what are the Liberal Party's values, and more specifically, what policies are they going to follow? And are they a significant departure from that of Justin Trudeau? Because it's very clear Canadians have had their share, and maybe more so, of a focus on sort of progressive politics.
You think there has to be a shift back toward the middle, more centrist
I
view?
think so. In fact, when you look back and you see when Trudeau himself came in 2015, he was replacing effectively a Prime Minister, Stephen Harper, who had been in power for about 10 years. And there was a general feeling at the time that Harper was a bit elitist and a bit standoffish, but more importantly, that he had shifted politics and political discourse and policies in Canada too much to the right of center. And now it's just swung back in the opposite direction.
It seems quite likely that Trump will move ahead with the 25% tariffs. He met with senators on Capitol Hill last week, and that was part of the conversation about moving ahead with that. How much of an impact will that have on Canada's economy to have a 25% tariff on everything that it ships to the U.S.?
It'd be, I wouldn't say nightmarish, but it would be a horrible development for the Canadian economy. How so? I think most economists suggest that in short order, in maybe 2 or 3 months, Canada would be in a recession. And you put yourself in the hands of a business. Let's say you're a Quebec softwood lumber dealer, and you're used to, you have customers in the United States, and you want to send your products here. Then all of a sudden, those buyers, if you will, are going to look at the price, and they're going to say, well, okay, there's a 25% tariff. So what do? Do I buy the product and absorb the cost myself, or do I buy the product and pass it along to the consumer? For those folks, maybe they don't buy as much, or they hold off to see, at least temporarily, to see if this irritant, if you will, in the Canada-U.S. relationship can be resolved and resolved quickly. It's not going to be positive, because when you look at the industries that Canada works on so closely with the United States, particularly automotive production, that alone, and we know how many times a car in the process of being assembled crosses the border often, it could be really, really painstakingly difficult for not only the federal government, but for specific provinces too.
This could really disrupt the supply chain.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's no question about that. Anybody who suggests otherwise is foolhardy, frankly.
Canada now is figuring out how they may retaliate with tariffs of their own, what they may go after in the U.S. Meantime, Trudeau's been trolled by Trump, referring to him as the governor of the 51st state, and all the talk at that press conference last week and the post about annexing Canada. Did he face pretty severe criticism back home about how he handled all of this, going to Mar-a-Lago in November, and how he's responded?
He hasn't really. I mean, the opposition parties in Canada have tried to suggest that Trudeau was weak. He's even weaker now because he's stepping down as Prime Minister. That the idea to try and nip things in the bud, if you will, by jetting down to Mar-a-Lago and working out, and subsequently sending some senior officials down to meet with some Trump senior officials, Republican officials, like Lindsey Graham and others, was maybe ill-advised. It's definitely a difficult issue for the Prime Minister, a difficult issue for Canadians. I think most Canadians, however, Tom, look at this entire development as part and parcel of, here we come back with a very unpredictable president or president-elect who soon will be president in a few days. And the truth is, we have to be prepared for what's going to be, in simple terms, a bumpier ride than maybe when he was in office from 2017 to 2021. So,
Trudeau did push back more this past week when he was in Washington to attend President Jimmy Carter's state funeral. He stopped by the cable networks, CNN and MSNBC, to do interviews to speak out about the 51st state and the annexing Canada. Trudeau says he thinks that Trump is looking to create a diversion as he moves ahead with the tariffs against Canada. Lots of speculation about what may be driving it, but is that one of the best guesses at this point?
I think Trump's positions with regard to Trudeau and Canada more generally, this idea of a 51st state or erasing the political line of demarcation between sovereign states, is really driven by a couple of things. Yes, he likes to troll the prime minister, and I think when you look at Truth Social and you look at the variety of posts, if you will, that the president-elect puts up, is because he really doesn't like Trudeau, and we know that from his first term in office. I mean, there was no love. They didn't bond. Trudeau was a bartender, and he was a skier, and he was a teacher. He was not a businessman, and not a successful businessman, and not a billionaire, right? So in that gambit of the world, it makes it, in Trump's eyes, it's tough to buddy up, I guess you could say, on the golf course or what have you. So they never did develop a close relationship back then, and this is just symptomatic of that. The president-elect is suggesting about, and we may find out, in the coming week, the imposition of 25% across-the-board tariffs for all Canadian imports into the United States, or all Canadian exports from Canada to the United States. The truth is, this is really driven, he has a profound attachment to tariffs. He always has. This is not something new. But it's really in part motivated by something that he finds entirely bothersome, which is Canada is running about a $100 billion trade surplus annually with the United States. And there's Canadian officials, federal and provincial, have tried to suggest to Mr. Trump and his advisors, there's clear reasons for this. You want our crude oil, and it's safe, and it's coming from Alberta for the American Midwest. It's there. You need our strategic minerals, so on and so forth, right? However, to Mr. Trump, that's symptomatic of Canada ripping off the United States, that Canada is somehow taking advantage of the United States, that somehow the existing trade arrangements, even the new USMCA, are working to the disadvantage of Washington. So then all of a sudden, when he's irritated by these things, he says, oh yeah, tariffs against Canada.
What about Trudeau's political future? He's in his early 50s. We saw his father, Pierre Trudeau. He came back after losing in 1979. He won in 1980. Do you see a similar political resurrection possibly for his son, or do you think this may be it for him?
That's a fascinating question. He's young. As you point out, I think if he were to reemerge, for example, on the federal political scene, it would take time. I think a lot of people will be talking about this in the days to come about, does Mr. Trudeau have a future in Quebec politics? Quebec Liberal Party itself has been a bit rudderless for some time. The Liberals are sort of, don't have a leader, don't have a dynamic leader, aren't a presence really outside of Anglophone Quebec, and really outside of the Anglophone portions of the island of Montreal. And I'm not suggesting Mr. Trudeau would want that, but he may wait to an election or two cycle down the road. I think, Tom, the bottom line is he's not done.